There's another exchange on environmental regulation where, once again, Dave Rubin comes out looking foolish.
You want to have money so that your family can live in a house that you can afford and that you can send your kids to good schools and all of those things. That's all rational self-interest. If at the same time you were running a nuclear power plant and you were Mr. Burns and you were dumping in the river.
Dumping in the river sounds like the perfect description of Dave Rubin talking about politics.
That's all rational self-interest. If at the same time you were running a nuclear power plant and you were Mr. Burns and you were dumping in the river, well, no, that's actually no longer rational self-interest because now you're polluting the very environment that you live in.
What's with this idea that everybody is operating with rational self-interest? Plenty of people believe and do things that I would argue are far from rational or in their best interest, like eating yourself into a state of morbid obesity, or smoking a pack a day, or believing that the Bible is the infallible Word of God, or attending a Dave Rubin event and claiming that you had a great time. You must have a very high opinion of people to believe that we're all walking around in a state of cool rationality. What if your rational self-interest tells you to pollute the river to maximize profits, and just to not go near the river to avoid the toxins? I can guarantee you that the executives of fracking companies are not drinking tall glasses of the groundwater they pollute. And if companies are willing to do things like this with regulations restricting them, how much worse would things be if we eliminated all regulations? There is no possible world where we get rid of regulations and the environment is better off as a result.
If at the same time you were running a nuclear power plant and you were Mr. Burns and you were dumping in the river, well, no, that's actually no longer rational self-interest because now you're polluting the very environment that you live in. So rational,
So
I mean, the
who
key
takes care of that? Who regulates that?
So
Is that where the government comes in?
So those guys, I don't want to speak for.
Well, who gets you in trouble if you, in your opinion, if you're this deregulation guy?
Yeah.
Who goes after you when you dump shit into the river?
So I'm not saying there should be no regulation. I just was saying that I like this. Generally, I like this line of thinking. There has to be some regulation. I agree.
The same pattern rears its ugly head. He cites an example of deregulation, then when challenged on it, he's like, I'm not actually calling for this kind of deregulation. I'm not against all regulations. Then why bring this up as an example in the first place? Why lay out this position if you don't actually believe it? Why not put on the table for us specific examples of regulation that you are opposed to? It seems like he's talking out of both sides of his mouth here, and perhaps that's the result of swimming in one too many polluted rivers. You know, I might add this tactic to my debating toolbook to throw my opponents off every now and then. Wouldn't things be much better if we reinstated Stalinism? That's a terrible idea. Well, I'm not actually advocating this, I just think it's an interesting idea intellectually.
Generally, I like this line of thinking. There has to be some regulation. I agree. You can't. But what I would say is,
that's where the regulation comes in.
Let's put it this way.
When you pollute the environment?
Yeah, that I would say there has to be some. But I've had some interesting people on, conservatives who are doing environmental stuff from a conservative perspective, that there's ways to make money actually in green stuff, in green products.
Of course. But what's the solution if someone pollutes?
So what those guys would argue is what I said before, which is that ultimately, especially now because of technology, like in the old days, so like every time someone cuts regulation, I've heard Bill Maher say this a lot, they're going to start polluting the river immediately. That implies that these businessmen, whatever industry that they're in, that they're immediately going to be like, ha, the regulation's gone, start polluting the water. We live in a time now where everyone's walking around with an iPhone, where maybe 50 years ago you could have got away with a lot of bad shit, right? Mm-hmm. Coal miners that were breathing all kinds of horrible shit that nobody was ever going to find out about, where now everybody is walking around with Snapchat and Instagram and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of this stuff would be exposed more so that all of the things that we've been talking about for the last couple hours about people getting involved, a lot of the things I think would start self-regulating.
Once again, this is extremely naive nonsense right here. He doubts the idea that businesses will immediately start polluting waterways if we remove regulations. What if doing so could save them millions of dollars? Needing to carefully capture, transport, and safely dispose of toxic waste is a time-consuming and expensive process. If you could just dump these toxins into the river, you could save an enormous amount of money. So without regulation, what would stop these companies from doing precisely this? According to Dave Rubin, social media will save the day. Really, so how is this process going to work? Somebody posts a picture of pollution, we all engage in a mass boycott, and eventually pressure that company to change? How many mass fish die-offs will take place before that? How many people will get cancer from swimming in that river before they remedy their ways? How bad would things need to become? How complete must the environmental destruction be for there to be enough outrage and a large enough boycott that the company is pressured into stopping the pollution? Why allow so much needless damage to take place when we can just prevent it altogether through regulation? This process of public regulation through social media outrage is so incredibly unrealistic and impractical that I can hardly believe a single serious person thinks that things would work out this way. He frames it as if pollution of the waterways will be clearly visible to the public, as if there's going to be some large pipe cartoonishly dumping bright green liquid into the river from 10 feet above the waterline, with a bright yellow sign next to it featuring a skull and crossbones and the words "danger," "poison," in all caps. What if the pollution pipe is simply submerged under the river and it's not visible to the public, and thus can't be posted on Twitter or Snapchat? If several factories are densely populating the shoreline, how are you going to pinpoint the source of the pollution in the first place? And who is going to take it upon themselves to determine that the liquid coming out of this pipe is even toxic? Are private citizens just going to paddle over there in a canoe on their day off, take samples, run it through a laboratory in their garage, and post the findings on Twitter, crossing their fingers and hoping that their tweet happens to go viral enough to spark a mass boycott? There is just no way that the environment would be adequately protected without regulation, and any thought to the contrary is quite literally a pipe dream.
All of the things that we've been talking about for the last couple hours about people getting involved, a lot of the things I think would start self-regulating. But again, and then I won't say it again, I'm not for just deregulating everything. I just think there's probably better ways to do it than just having the government come in and say, this is what you got to do and now figure it out. Because the government isn't that good at most things.
There's probably better ways than just having the government come in. Really, what are these better ways? Get specific. Just vaguely stating that you think there are probably better ways is not even remotely convincing to anybody. I think there are better ways, okay, and I think there are not. So if all we're doing is surmising vaguely without elaborating, I guess we're at a standstill. I can point to real-world example after example of government regulation effectively reducing pollution and protecting the environment. All the libertarian can do is tell me about how he thinks things might work out in his fantasy world. Who but a fool would be willing to take the massive risk of putting the global environment completely in jeopardy while we deregulate and hope for the best on the basis of unsubstantiated, evidence-free, libertarian conjecture? This would be one of the single most moronic public policy decisions in world history, and that is not an exaggeration.
I just think there's probably better ways to do it than just having the government come in and say, this is what you got to do and now figure it out. Because the government isn't that good at most things.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there, but I do think that obviously there has to be laws in place, specifically laws in place that protect people from someone doing something that's going to damage all the other people in the community.
Yeah. Well, by the way, so you can do that from, look, the government's supposed to protect your life and your property. I mean, that's a very simple libertarian thing. You know what I mean? Like, so that there's a good argument there for why you could have some level of regulation.
Right, but I don't think it's just specifically in terms of like someone polluting rivers. I don't think it's good enough to Snapchat about it. I think people should be locked up and go to jail. If they find out that someone's dumping toxic waste into the river because it's too expensive to process it and get it removed and put in some place where it's safe, that's a crime.
Yeah. Well, I'm all for fining those people and having the companies fire them and all those things. As far as putting them in jail, I don't know that I'm...
Lock them up.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm...
Get them off the streets.
Damn, son. Joe kicked some ass in this exchange. Probably my favorite quote from the entire podcast is when Joe said, quote, "I don't think it's good enough to Snapchat about it. I think people should be locked up and go to jail," end quote. That right there is a perfect distillation of the differing attitudes that libertarians and non-libertarians have towards protecting the environment. I'm on Patreon. There's a link in the description if you'd like to support my content. I would really appreciate it. There's also social media links in there if you want to follow me there. I'm trying to build up some of those followings. I would really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe for more videos if you haven't already. Hit the bell, hit the like button, post a fucking comments. All that fun stuff that's standard on YouTube. You know the fucking drill. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this.